Chapter 5 of Sinister House by Leland Hall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Ben Tucker. Chapter 5. My temper was harrowed. The picture I carried in my mind of Julia, pale and exhausted, lying on the couch before the open window over the river, away from the sunbeams and with no glittering response in her hair to the blue western light of early morning, was one to stir in a man more nervous than I, that rising of feeling as against something wrong. Indeed, I was so upset that I managed to put one over on my wife, whom I found paring cucumbers in the kitchen, and whom I treated with great firmness, ending all resistance with the flat statement that Julia was all in, and no fit subject to be told that her husband carried nightmares round with him. As for Giles, he kept to his room all the morning, but at lunch he fairly put us through an inquisition. He wanted to know about Eric, who he was, where he came from, and what he did. We couldn't tell him much. In fact, we didn't know anything about Eric, in that way. Eric appeared to have a little money. He had spoken to me of real estate in Chicago once, and I always supposed his income came from that. And I supposed likewise that he had just been to Chicago to see about it. I don't know how it was that Giles put the little we knew and the much we did not know about Eric in an unpleasant light. He did just that, in a rather nasty way. That is, he made Eric out a man of mystery. Furthermore, Giles's sympathy for Julia was very intense, and that too somehow deepened the shadow on Eric. About her he apparently knew far more than we had ever known, though he utterly ignored our questions. Annette was pleased to frame up a little mystery round Julia then. It was rather in the way of a joke, and chiefly to protect Eric, who, after all, if his wife was going to be sickly and nervous, had a claim on us for sympathy too. Giles's aspersions on the character of Eric seemed to me quite unjustified. I brought to his attention the evidence of Julia's own behavior and condition, which still I took to have their main cause in her grief at parting from Eric. But Giles scoffed at that, and in my own heart I had already begun to feel a restless doubt. I was glad that afternoon to make a bluff of having to go over the fort again, and to get away from Giles's pestiferous questions about my friend. But at the table he had, as it were, stuck us with a poison point, and the venom made me uncomfortable with the thought that all might not be right and natural in the house where Eric and Julia lived. I saw Giles go banging off by himself. At night he told us that he had called at Mrs. Greer's late in the afternoon, and had been informed by the servant that Mrs. Greer had gone at once to bed after her ill turn of the morning, and that she had fallen into a deep sleep, from which she had not then waked. Later in the evening I telephoned. Even then she had not stirred in her bed. Giles called hers the sleep of a ghastly exhaustion. Hard-headed as he remained all through the affair, and often as he reprimanded me for imagining things about the house, strangely enough it was he who first suggested to me that there was something uncanny in this business of Julia's ill turns. It was amazing how Julia was herself again the very next day. Yet I saw a new look in her face. It wasn't only a look. There was a slight drawing of the lips you see on the faces of persons who are concentrating all their energies to meet a prolonged strain on their nervous force. Her manner changed, too. She was not standoffish, but a little on her guard. As for Eric, during the next 6 weeks he became more and more reserved. He grew thinner, too, and his face, too, had a wholly somber expression. I noticed that he was reserved even with Julia, and while his attentions to her seemed no less actuated by an unusually passionate and devoted love, they were more controlled and perhaps more formal. His hair, already touched with gray when I first saw him, became almost white at the temples and over the ears. I took it he was worrying over Julia's health. There was no doubt that she fell off when he was around, and each time he went away she regained a little less before he came back. Whatever was going on between them, Annette and I knew it was none of our business. So long as the weather stayed fine, we had our own happy outdoor lives to lead. We had our children, the Ford, and my vacation. It was nothing to either of us what Giles did with himself. We thought it very odd that he tolerated Forsby so long. We more than tolerated him. We learned to put up with his tempers, to take him at his best. We should have been glad to take Julia with us on our outings now and then, but I can't remember that she ever made one with us at that time. I wonder why. I know she needed company. Though our children are a bit noisy, she loved them, and they would have done her good. I remember thinking that they would be better company for a woman in her state than Giles could be, but Though Giles was nervous and restless, there was something resolute and straightforward about him, which may have been, I used to think, what helped her best to pass the hours of her separation from Eric. I let it go at that, failing utterly to realize how, at that time, she needed for a friend just such a man as Giles, one who would keep her mind busy and vary her thoughts. The house, which most of Thorsby considered an unwholesome place, fell under a deeper shadow. Julia entertained fewer and fewer guests there, and toward the end, before she and Eric left it for good and all, Giles and my wife and I were almost the only neighbors who went there. Nothing could throw Giles into a more furious tantrum than Annette's antipathy to the house. He liked the house himself, but in his self-assumed role of detective in regard to Eric, he was always seeking to know what had brought Eric to it. That used to irritate me. I thought it unfair to Eric. I said to him again and again, he took it because Julia liked it at first sight. Invariably he would reply that didn't explain what had brought Eric to this godforsaken part of the world in the first place. On one occasion, Annette, stung by his ungracious allusions to Thorsby, gave him back an unusually vivid account of Julia's spooky reception by the house in question. A house which had a spirit in it, maybe 2 or 3, that flung open the windows and sang to unsuspecting victims to tempt them into it. "Tumble-down old haunted shanty," she said, "fit for an insane asylum. Or for the company of artists, of course, dear Giles and artistic people. Eric must have been crazy to get it for her." Giles grew very icy. "You cannot be expected to see the spiritual charm in such places, Annette." "Yes," said Annette, with a little toss of her head. "So Julia once told me, and no house ever sang to me either, and if one did, I hope I'd have sense enough to stay out of it." Giles pounded on the table. We were still at lunch. "But what I want to know," he roared in his best style, "is why he brought her here in the first place. Where does he come from? What brought a man like him down to this flat, deadly part of God's earth?" "Maybe he too heard the singing over the long-distance wire to New York," I answered, trying to smooth things out. Our little Bobby was at the table. He adored Eric and Julia, and he seemed to have caught the idea of the conversation as children will, and to have taken an interest in it. Childlike, too, he began softly at first, but with increasing clamor and violent approaches to his mother's face, to ask over and over again, Ma, what brought Uncle Eric to the singing house? Ma, what brought Uncle Eric to the singing house?" It got fearfully on Giles's nerves. "Hush," said his mother. "Hush, hush." And then unwinding his 2 arms with impatience, "If you don't stop your noise this minute, Robert, you shall go to bed without any supper tonight." He got down from his mother's lap then and crawled under the table. We tried to regain our composure, but, unobserved, that lad of mine got round to Giles and, tugging at his coat for attention, I wonder how malicious children are, demanded his answer. "Cousin Giles, what brought Uncle Eric to the singing house?" Giles sprang up in a fury. "Nothing, you good pest! Nothing good!" he shouted, and went raging out of the room. I think that at first singing house suggested to Bobby merely his cuckoo clock. He had always been enchanted and a bit frightened by the flying open of the little door, the inexplicably sudden apparition of the wooden songster, its song and its equally sudden silence and disappearance. Many children tire of this regular, self-performing miracle, and most boys will sooner or later have the thing apart. Bobby, on the contrary, would have been aghast at the mere thought of dismembering even a wooden bird. He was a sensitive little fellow. He feared the clock at first, and his curiosity never got liberated from his fear sufficiently for him to venture a finger into the black hole from out of which the bird sprang to sing. As for what went on behind that door, after it had closed the poor bird in, I am sure he had lurid imaginings. How deep an impression the idea of a whole singing house made on the child we did not suspect. I do not know what his mind peopled it with besides his Uncle Eric and his Aunt Julia. Anyhow, the place began to be somewhat fearful for him. Whenever we drove past it in the Ford, he drew up closer to me. He always sat on the front seat unless we were out after dark, and there was, I felt, something communicative in his fear. At one time, Annette, and I too, used to tell the little boy spooky stories just to make his eyes grow big and round. It is an unwise and a cruel practice with children like him, and we don't do it any more. Besides, we know too well ourselves now how much torture lurks in a dim and inconceivable thing of terror. But at that time we were both capable of adding touches of gruesome horrors to the stories we told him. We had no premonition of the lesson we were to learn, and that very soon. Late one afternoon we were in a field, the three of us, well up the river. It was still warm, though the sun was dropping low. It had been hazy all day, and we had been at peace, untroubled by worry of any sort. Annette had taken along with her a book of myths and folklore, and had read one or two of them to Bobby, who would sit enraptured as long as she would read them. Just before it was time for us to be starting back home, she finished that rather revolting one of the Lorelei. It was some Lorelei in that version of the story, one with a hearty appetite for human flesh. I can see the little boy now, snuggled very close under his mother's arm. He was looking at the pages as she read them, though he hadn't begun to learn his letters. Facing the last page of the story, there was a crude engraving of the fascinating man-eating lady. Maybe you have seen it. She sits alone on the top of a high rock above the river, clothed only in her long bright hair and a very scanty smock, which Bobby probably thought was her bib. She had horrid, bold eyes, and her mouth looks well fed. The narrow plateau on which she sits is encumbered all round her with thigh bones, presumably human, and skulls undoubtedly so. Bobby just stared at that. He had had his finger on every bone and on every one of the 5 strings in the harp she held in her hand. I picked up the rugs and the lunch basket and went up to the car to make all ready for the ride home. But when I came back down through the tall dry grass of the field to summon Annette and the boy to the car, I found that they had not moved to prepare themselves for the start, that Bobby was really afraid to make a move in the twilight that had already fallen upon the disappearance of the sun. I had to pick him up in my arms and carry him to the car. The night air was already cool. I felt then that it was wrong to read the little fellow such horrible stuff and to let him see such pictures. I spanked him in a friendly way and promised him he should ride home on the front seat. But that didn't work. He wanted to be close to someone, and I had scolded him so often for getting in my way when he was riding beside me that he knew well his only hope for snuggling lay in the back seat. His mother laughed at him, but she took him under her wing, wrapped him warm against the cold breeze, and in the dark we started off. We had 10 miles to go, down along the river, from which before long the mists began to rise, spreading eerily over the marshes and settling into the hollows of the road.
"Silly boy," I heard his mother say. "Silly boy to be afraid." "Did she sing when she was hungry?" I heard him ask in his high, tense voice. "You are thinking of little Tommy Tucker, who sang for his supper," I heard her answer. "But what was the Lorelei's supper, Mama? Did she eat little boys and girls?"
And so on, until Annette, to get the horrid idea out of his head, resorted to that reprehensible mixture of terrorism with morality which many mothers administer to their children. As, for example, her telling Bobby that only naughty people heard the Lorelei sing at all, and all naughty people ought to be eaten if they weren't. How careful we both are now to keep the conceptions of horror from taking root in the minds of our children. The night settled darker and darker, and colder and colder. Here and there we passed through a queer warm streak in the air. I finally told Bobby over my shoulder that there was no such things as Lorelei's anyhow, that the whole thing was nonsense. But in a few moments I heard him again.
"Aren't there any Lorelei's on the Hudson, Mama?" "No, dear, there aren't any, anywhere." "But Uncle Eric heard the singing house. Was there a Lorelei in the singing house? Was Uncle Eric a bad man and heard her sing?" "Come, come, my boy, he didn't hear anyone sing." "But who did?" "Aunt Julia just played she did." "Then there isn't any Lorelei in the singing house?" "No, darling, and there wasn't any singing in it." "Then it won't eat Aunt Julia?"
"Come on, my son," I broke in. "I'm so hungry that if you keep on talking this way, I'll eat you." "And Papa can't sing," said my wife, seizing, as she always seized, the chance to give me a playful jibe. Bang! A blowout, and we were 4 miles from home, and the night already heavy upon us. A forlorn predicament. I got out, and by the light of a miserable candle stub began my repairs. While I was working, Annette heard, faint in the distance, the whistle of the 7:30 train from New York, due in Forsby at 8:30.
"I wonder if Eric's coming back on that train," she murmured with a yawn. "And I wonder where Giles is getting his supper."
Supper? Is there a more maddening word to distract the mind of a fellow in my fix? We stayed by the roadside a good half hour, and by the time we started on again the night was thick. We were savagely hungry, and our nerves were on edge. Fortunately, Bobby soon fell asleep. We rode on in silence, my mind on the road before me, often shrouded in the night mist which took strange shapes before our lamps, and my whole body crying out for something warm to eat. But even against Ford's fate sometimes sets herself. Just by the gloomy hemlocks that bordered the highway when it runs by Eric's house, we suffered another blowout. I swore and stopped the engine. Immediately, the night was black about us. For a moment I thought it was silent too, but then my ears caught the sound of a woman's voice, singing. It came from somewhere behind those hemlocks, round which the mist was in a strange and sinuous movement, without any other sound to accompany it, without any gleam of light. A voice in the blackness, so disassociated from human life as to suggest something unearthly. To make matters worse, Bobby, half wakened by the stopping of the car, began to scream in terror.
"I hear the singing house! I hear the singing house! Oh, Mama, it is going to eat me! It's going to eat me!"
It got terribly on my nerves, not only the nerve-wracking yelling, but the association of the faint thread of song with the hideous story of sorcery and inhuman cruelty. "Oh, shut up!" I shouted at my son in a temper as I got myself stiffly out of the car. His screaming subsided at once into a sort of frightened whimpering, through which I could still hear, though very faintly, a note or two of the song. But he let loose again and clutched frantically at his mother, when she had to move herself and him in order to let me get at the necessary implements in the chest under the back seat. By the certain light of matches, I struck one after the other. I found my jack, my tire irons, and my amending tissues, but no trace of the candle stub. I must have left it at the place where we had been held up before. Well, I tried to light one of the kerosene lamps. As luck would have it, it was empty of oil. I tried all the kerosene lamps. They were all empty, even the tail light, which I seldom troubled to light in this remote part of the world. My cursing was ardent but low. There was something in the blackness of the night. The stars were all obscured by the haze. There was something in the blackness, I repeat, in the damp, heavy clinging of the mist, extra chill by those forever sunless trees, and in the mysterious and only half-audible sound of singing coming to us through the fear-haunted thicket, which cast a spell over me and mine. One I was not venturesome enough to shatter with a loud ringing oath. And there was Bobby's incessant and agitating whimpering, too, a sort of cold rill of fear. It was impossible to do my work in the darkness, and I made up my mind to go to the house and ask for a light, rather than to burn gasoline for half an hour or more and keep the engine running just for the front lamps.
"Well, hurry then," Annette said to me, half whispering herself. "Don't leave me alone in this black hole."
"I thought you had some sense, Annette," I growled crossly. Taking a long breath as if I were going to plunge into a cold bath, I stumbled down into the dark driveway. I hadn't felt my way more than a few steps, however, before such a heavy feeling as if peril were closing in round us settled on me that I turned and went back to the car. I meant only to reassure Annette. As a matter of fact, I made her scream. A second time I braved the clammy darkness of the driveway, and this time I came in sight of the house. I say in sight because at last my eyes had definite perception. Through one of the south windows, against which the curtains had not been drawn, the uncertain and not very penetrating light from a branch of candles was streaming. At first this was heartening, but almost before I had taken another step I stopped short in my tracks. Against that bar of light I saw distinctly the silhouetted head and shoulders of a man. Had he not moved, I certainly should have taken the bulk which revealed him as a protuberance from the dark mass of shrubs along that wall of the house, the outline of which was only half distinct against the light. He was standing some 4 or 5 feet from the window, evidently looking in. It was a movement nearer that had arrested my attention. One thinks only of wickedness in such moments. It never occurred to me that the fellow, whoever he was, might have been drawn towards the window by the sound of singing, faint but sweet, that came from the house, recently as I had been reminded of the drawing power of the hungry and destructive Lorelei. I thought only that Julia was in danger of insult, of shock, or even of some bodily harm. Instantly, my heart beating faster, I confess, I began to steal up on the villain. I stood low over the ground. I myself must have become invisible in the darkness, while to my eyes he stood a little more clearly outlined against the night. Nearer and nearer I crept over the damp grass with not a sound to betray me. His ears must have been filled with the music, however black the thoughts that filled his heart. He must have been a careless brute, too, for in edging ever nearer to the window he put himself more and more into the light, and into full view of anyone within the room who might chance to look out through the window. He rustled the bushes as well. Several times I heard them snap with a sharp, clear sound. As I approached, the feeling that there was evil about him and danger for Julia grew so intense in my breast that I made up my mind I would strike him from behind with all my strength, without any preliminary questions. He was, I could see, a taller man than I, and probably much stronger. Since I had only my bare fist to fell him with, I must spring upon him and take him utterly by surprise. I knew I must leap when I reached the bushes, for I could not hope to creep nearer to him through them without much crackling, to which not even the sweet singing could have made the prowler deaf. That singing kept smoothly on. I had a feeling that the fellow was really listening to it, and I was glad, for it served my purpose. Just before I decided it was time for me to make the leap, I prayed for a more ringing note. My prayer was not granted. Instead, I heard the singing shiver to a sort of sob. I jumped nevertheless, for even at that moment I heard my prey lurch forward. He was actually rattling the window, which was low and made in the French fashion to open like a door. What my half-blinded eyes saw through that window when I leapt up I shall never forget. First, let me say I recognized the man who was rattling it to get in. It was Eric. Then within the room I saw Julia still sitting at the piano, but with her face turned towards her husband, and on it a look of unspeakable horror. I saw Giles, his back to me, half risen from his chair, and as if turned to stone by the expression he saw on Julia's face. It must have been only for a second or two, this frozen and horrible fixedness within the room. As for Julia, it might have been the shock of seeing a face peering in at her, even her husband's, so sudden and like an apparition in the night. But it wasn't that. I saw her move, or force herself to move, and rise from the piano. Slowly, step by step, she made her way towards the window. And on her face I saw meanwhile revealed her indomitable spirit, fighting to bring a light of recognition to her eyes and outshine the lurid horror there. I saw her hands before her, not as a blind person's low and searching, but rigidly straight out before her, hardened and sharpened to beat and tear a ghastly invisible medium through which at cost of an enormous effort she slowly forced herself to make way. Yet they only twitched in small weak movements, like hands locked in a rigor of all but death. How terribly slow her steps were, and all the while I heard Eric rattling the window to get in. He did get in, but even then she could not propel herself towards him. It was he who rushed towards her, and he hid her from me in his embrace. I felt almost sick. Just before I hurried away, my eyes saw Giles, risen to his feet, his face turned into the light, amazed and horror-struck, even as my own must have been. End of Chapter 5.